All right, today I'm going to be talking to you about the effects of standardized applied behavior analysis in equine therapy for children in the autism spectrum. And for those of you that are not familiar with autism, it's a complex diagnosis that over the years we've seen changes in what applies to that, but basically it applies to issues with communication and adaptive and executive functioning and repeated types of behaviors. Now, one of the reasons why we want to look at this not only is because of what happens with students in school, but also because in the community as a whole, the last study that came out from the CDC, there was 1 in 68 children who were diagnosed with an issue related to autism. And so it's become quite prevalent in society, not only just in the schools, but as they continue to grow up, we're starting to notice, what do we do? How can we help them? I chose this topic, like Dr. Gardner said, because one of my children fell under the autism spectrum about 10 years ago, and there was not a lot of research in that. So in doing that as a parent, I kept trying to find information of what I could do at home. I was not interested in using drugs at that point. And he related very closely with animals. And even though there wasn't a lot of research in equine therapy at that time related to autism, I thought, well, he loves horses, he loves animals, let's try this. And what I did see was an improvement in communication. And I always wondered why, but never really had the opportunity to research that. And so looking over therapeutic writing in and of itself, not only as it relates to autism, but all children, it emphasizes self-control, improved attention and focus, and also improves sensory management, and it encourages both verbal and nonverbal communication. So the first aspect, of course, that I personally looked at was communication, because I wanted to know why. Why did that work for my son? And it was inconclusive as to why. We don't know whether it's the relationship between the child and the horse, whether it's the movement, whether it's the process in itself, the order of which it's done. Lots of different theories came into that. One thing that was agreed upon was that during therapeutic writing, communication increases, but sometimes it decreases when the therapeutic writing ceases to be in the child's life. So we wanted to look at why is that. Could they create a type of mechanical type of situation that could mimic the same motion that the horse gives, so that a child who may be not able to continue riding could, again, have the same effects. There were 2 studies that I looked at. One was Lanning, Bayer, Ivy Hotz, Krennick, and Tubbs. That was a 12-week study. It had 2 different control groups. One of the groups focused simply on therapeutic riding. They looked at the safety and grooming and then the riding itself, but it also had a control group that simply looked at social circles. Could we gain some of the same type of advances in their communications just simply by them being in a group, talking more with their peers? The next one was Ward, Wallow, Rusnick, Wendell, and Paschal. And this was conducted with sensory activities at the beginning of the lesson, and then it went into individualized lessons with the students. It went for 10 weeks of riding, took 6 weeks off, and then went back again for 8 weeks to see if there was a change in those communications. Each of these studies worked with individual students and also how they needed to adjust according to what the child could tolerate. It was not consistent in any really of the lessons other than what it included as a whole. That, of course, created variations in the results. In the Ward study, it was mostly focused on how riding could improve school type of behaviors. There was improvements in social communication, in attention, in tolerance, and reactions to sensory input within the classroom itself. It did not look on any broad spectrum, only in the classroom. And then the Lanning study, both of the groups saw an improvement in all qualities of life domain, but they noticed the highest increase in social functioning and communication. But the riding group in itself had a greater overall behavior in social, emotional, and school functioning, which concluded with the result that about 75% of children in the autism spectrum who were included in therapeutic riding most likely would have an improvement in communication. 45% would have an overall emotional improvement. And next I looked at how therapeutic riding could improve the adaptive and executive functioning. This study had a lot of people involved in it. It was in Italy. It was Borgi, Lolivo, Serno, Chirato, Venerosi, Brahmini, Gnosis, Marcelli, Venti, Santis, Basacchi, Faragelli, Franscarelli, and Cerulli. This took 15 students. They did not really look at communication initially because they wanted to look simply at the adaptive and executive functioning of the students. They used the Vineland Adaptive Behavioral Scale. They used it 30 days prior to the riding, then immediately after the 6 months, and then 30 days after completion to have a consistent record of what was happening with each of the students. Because it was not individualized and it was very, very standardized in what they did, they had 3 to 5 students in each group, and each group went through the same exact process regardless of what happened with the individual students within that group. They followed consistently through that. And although the other studies had improvements in communication and this one didn't, there was a reduction in planning time, problem solving, and following directions. All right, the last study the last component that I looked at was adaptive behavior analysis, or ABA, applied behavior analysis. And it is the use of techniques and procedures and principles to change behaviors, whether that's increasing a behavior or decreasing a behavior. And it's the most widely used therapy for children in the autism spectrum disorder. Right now, because it is fairly new in prevalence in being used, it's very costly. So a lot of the school systems may not have the faculty that can provide this service for their autism students. Sometimes insurance will not provide that through their physician. It's also very specific to each individual student, so it takes a lot of research and time just simply in that before you can even begin to start to use it with the children. It also is limited in the access for the area. If you're in a rural area, you may not find anyone that can provide this for your child. So parents are wanting to find alternatives that they can use instead of just simply drug therapy. What can they use if they can't find ABA in their area? And equine therapy may be something that they would want to look into. This next study was conducted in 2013, and it was Hull, Baird, Kim, Rajoro, DeSilva, Podolinsky, Mawazinski, and Minshew. It was a 3-phase, 12-week study on 3 single subjects. The first participant was the control group. He had the same 3 behaviors that the other 2 students had at least one of those behaviors. It also was a once-a-week study, so that in the likelihood that this is something that becomes more prevalent with student schedules and parent schedules, once a week is something that is probably doable. The next subject had 3 lessons per week, and the last one had 5 lessons per week. Their target behaviors, like I said, were different for each one of them. There were 3 target behaviors, but the 2 that came out the most in increasing was the burgeoning verbalization, following directions at home, but there were also changes in non-target behavior, such as overall use of verbal communication increased physical strength and coordination, and the increased ability to respond to the rhythm of the actual horse. So if they started out very stiff and scared, they eventually just sort of gave in to that, and that also helped to improve in their communication. In conclusion, the American Academy of Pediatrics is very leery of suggesting alternative type therapies like this. The sensory-related therapies don't have as much research behind them, although they do have some research that has proven for most children to be effective. There's improvements, like I said, in communication, in adaptive and executive functioning, and control of repeated behaviors. Parker said it best when he said students with autism are multisensory learners, so instructional strategies have to be utilized to help each student in a unique manner. Just like in the one study, if the same exact process was used, there was not an increase in communication. But the other studies that had varied processes increased communication across the board. So whether it's the connection with the animal itself, which we see that a lot with autistic children, they may not feel comfortable communicating with another human, whether it's a peer or an adult, but they may feel a connection to an animal that they're not required to communicate with. Or because it appeals to them because it's a structured type of environment, which again is another thing that across the board is appealing to autistic children. Equine theory studies prove that the equine therapy opens doors for improved functioning in many areas for students with autism spectrum disorder. Thank you.